Okay, so today we are going to talk the first 5 steps. What to do when you realize that you're pregnant or you're thinking about getting pregnant again, and you really want to know those first few steps to take before you go and get a childbirth educator, before you find the books, before you even talk to your partner about this, before you hire a doula, before you hire a care provider, before you make a birth plan. What do you need to do? Okay, so I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you through story mostly. So this system I created after my traumatic birth with my son. I just could not believe how much the medical system had screwed me over. I was good and mad about it, but not only that, I was also really good and mad for my friends who had had it even worse than me, who had been talked into inductions, who had been talked into C-sections. And then the same thing, of course, happened with Jenny. She was a really empowered mom right from the beginning. She wanted to take all the classes. She's the kind of person who will hire a coach. She's the kind of person who will go and buy a course. She's the kind of person who invests in her education and in herself. And she was asking her doctor, okay, well, what do I need to do to have a healthy pregnancy? And you know what the doctor said to her? Eat a balanced diet. That was it. There was no other explanation. She went through that entire pregnancy with her doctor labeling her high risk because she had high blood pressure, but she wasn't given any specific steps that she could take to avoid preeclampsia or to avoid having an induction or to avoid having a cesarean or to avoid having any other complications with her health. She wasn't given any of that. Instead, the doctors just expected her to just rely on their expertise and they would just tell her things. And she said to me, it was like I was on a need-to-know basis and they felt I needed to know nothing. Now, that is incredibly frustrating. And when she said that to me, I still understood it because that was the same thing for me. I was on a need-to-know basis and I didn't need to know anything. When my son was not growing properly and I was asking about the ultrasounds and asking about, well, what does this mean? I was still on a doesn't need to know basis. In fact, at 39 weeks, my midwife actually called me up and she said, you know, I have been fighting for the last several weeks on this. As soon as I came back from vacation, I've been fighting with my colleagues to get you this information. There is nothing wrong with that ultrasound. In fact, it was very badly done. So that ultrasound that has now completely derailed your birth plan, it's not even admissible. Like it was stupid. They did it badly and then they went and scared me into agreeing to a hospital birth. But by 39 weeks, I already had the self-doubt in my head. And we're going to be talking about that in a moment, about self-doubt and how it can derail your birth plan. And I was just like, you know what? Like, I'm going to go into labor next week. Like, I don't have anything ready. I don't have the birth pool liner. I don't have my Chucks pads. I don't have any of my birth equipment. I didn't realize at the time that like you can get that stuff very quickly. Like she would have made it happen. Like she said, we'll make this happen. But I didn't believe it anymore. And I had been told that he might not tolerate labor well. So I was like, well, I can't possibly have a home birth because it wouldn't be safe because then my son might not tolerate my labor well and then I'll be in an emergency and then all this catastrophe will happen. And I was in that space of might possibly maybe happen and not in what was actually true for me. Setting boundaries as a mom is incredibly important, okay? And that starts with pregnancy. You need to set those boundaries. You need to recognize what you will allow in your space and what you won't. And I needed to learn those boundaries because I did not have them with my first pregnancy. I just let everything come in and it derailed my birth plan. The second time, I did not do that. I set the boundaries. I set the limits. I decided what my hard lines in the sand were of what I wasn't putting up with. And mine was, unless it's life or death, I'm not going back to that hospital. I'm not going back to any hospital. I'd sooner birth under a tree. Like that was my thoughts. And this is a lot of what happens is like you get in this traumatic birth space and you realize you never want to do that again. And you get to that point where it no longer matters about making people like you. You just want the birth that you want, and you're not putting up with no more crap. And so how do you get to that point? Well, first of all, if you're a first-time mom, you don't ever have to go there. You don't ever have to be in trauma. You can go and have an empowered birth without ever having experienced birth trauma. And if you have had a traumatic birth, then this is also how you can get the birth that you want this time. This is how you take your power back. This is how you change your story from being a victim and being like, this thing happened to me, this horrible, awful thing, and I never want that to happen again. And I'm scared and I don't know what to do. I don't know if I can have another baby, because if I do and it goes the same way, I'll never be able to handle it. Like, I'll just break down. To that was then, this is now, and I'm not going to let anybody tell me what to do ever again. Okay? So what do you do? Okay, before you even do anything else, if you are already pregnant and you've peed on the stick and it says pregnant, you gotta work through your fears. Okay? You gotta work through your fears. We all have fears. We're in a culture of fear. We're in a culture of patriarchy and misogyny where you have been taught all your life, and there's been messages that have come to you that your body is broken and defective and that you need to defer to the experts. Okay? So whether or not you had a home birth before or anything else, there's still those lingering doubts. There's still those fears. And it is in our culture. It is everywhere. In fact, House of the Dragon had their first episode that was absolutely triggering. And then a couple episodes later, they were also making it seem like, oh, it's not so bad. The pains aren't that bad. But the context, of course, is that the stepmother is saying this to the daughter whose mother died in childbirth. So it's like that. It's true, but then it's not true. And so the thing is that you really, really want to stand in your truth. And your truth is that you can have the birth you want. And not only can you have the birth that you want, but you can do it yourself. You don't have to do it yourself, but the fact is that you need to recognize that you could do it yourself, because birth is a physiological process that maybe in 10 to 15% of the time, and that's being generous, birth might need some help. Other times, it's a physiological process. It's going to happen. So oftentimes when I talk to my clients and they're scared, I ask them point blank, okay, so what happens if you go into labor and you're nowhere near a hospital? Well, I guess I'd have the baby, wouldn't I? And I'd have to do it unassisted, wouldn't I? Yeah, you would. And are you saying that if you just don't induce that baby is never coming out? Really? It's gonna happen. Your body is designed to do it. Maybe it's not going to happen on the arbitrary timeline that your care provider is giving you, but here's a secret about those arbitrary timelines. Oftentimes, they don't follow physiological birth, okay? They don't, because oftentimes your care provider is expecting you to show signs of labor progress when you're 39 weeks. The average gestation is 41 weeks and 3 days. And not only that, but before some man decided to come up with the timeline for pregnancy, we used to go by the moon. So you might even just be fluctuating with the way that the moon is and the moon energies, or even something is going on in your life. Maybe there's some stress that's happening. Maybe there's something out of balance. Your menstrual cycle is a vital sign. Okay, so it actually does serve a purpose. And once you're in alignment with that, you tend to recognize that your period is actually a gift. It really is. It's not a curse. It's a gift. Okay. And childbirth is a gift. And pregnancy is a gift, because it's the first time sometimes that you actually recognize and tune into your body. And Rebecca said this in her pregnancy. She said, you know, for the first time in my life, I'm actually tuning into my body. Like, I'm actually recognizing that when I need to rest, when I need to eat, when I need to sleep, when I need to take it easy. And Jenny too. she was recognizing like there were some hard parts of her pregnancy. And at the same time, she was tuning into herself. So near the end, she recognized she needed more time for sleep. So she did that. And she'd be like, you know, I can't do as much. And I'm like, it's okay. Your body's telling you to rest, go rest. The same thing for postpartum. The same thing if your baby is cluster feeding. You take that time. The feminine energy is about surrender, and it's about recognizing and tuning into your own emotions and your own body. Like your body is not against you. But the patriarchy, of course, doesn't want us in our feminine power, because the patriarchy thrives on women being disempowered and subjugated and oppressed so that they can control us as the commodity. Okay, you have to remember that the patriarchy existed because we were literal property. Okay, we were literal property. They had to control us. And for the longest time, the only thing we had was our cycles and the wise women and birth. But then at one point, men decided, hey, you know, it would be really lucrative if we moved to childbirth, because there's always going to be babies. And then we can also take away those gossips that are doing the little tittle tattle and the midwives, and our women will be more subdued. They'll be more compliant, because women behaving badly in a patriarchal society is good for humanity as a whole, but it's not so good for the patriarchy. So then they bring in these doctors, and then the women were resistant until they started to do a smear campaign against the midwives, right? So basically, like I talk about this a lot inside of my book, Your Empowered Birth. So you'll be able to get more of that, especially in the first few chapters. I talk about this, and I talk about this quite often on my YouTube channel as well. So first thing you got to do, you got to get past your fear. Because if you don't get past those fears and start to shift your mindset out of what the cultural context and patriarchal context and societal context and all those fears that you've been carrying, if you don't start to recognize those, they're going to control your birth. They're going to control how you come to your pregnancy. Because when you pee on the stick, you see the thing, you go, oh shit, now what? Like the baby's going to come out of me. I need help. Like that was my thing when I was pregnant with my son, is I was like, oh shit, like this is real now. Like I am pregnant. I am going to be on a very strict timeline. Like this baby is coming out in 9 to 10 months. And at that point I knew it was 9 months because I didn't know any better. But I'm like, this baby is coming out in 40 weeks and I have no idea what I'm doing. And I need to find a doctor, and I have no idea how to do that. And I need to find childbirth classes, and I don't know how to do that. And I need to find the books. What books do I read? And the only one I knew about was What to Expect When You're Expecting. So I had What to Expect When You're Expecting. And I was like trying to read through it. And What to Expect When You're Expecting also talked about how OBs are better than midwives, and that home birth is dangerous, and yada, 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 be blah, 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 whatever. It's very, very mainstream. It's very patriarchal. It's very, don't worry your pretty little head about it. But we're going to show you all the things that can go wrong so that you just turn to your doctor and you just let your doctor run things. And then another thing, of course, is that your doctor, if they are in that kind of space of thinking that they have control, they have a birth plan already for you before you even make that first appointment. And their birth plan is healthy baby, healthy mother. And their definition of healthy mother is live mother, not healthy mentally, emotionally, physically. It's just you're alive and the baby's alive. So we win. We're the heroes. And if we are going to do things to you, well, that's just part of our process to keep things safe. And if you don't do those things, we don't know how to help you. And then we're going to freak out. But I'm teaching you a new way, because a lot of those routine practices aren't necessary and aren't needed. So Jenny even was like, she came into labor and she was going to the hospital and she was like already pushing. And the nurse wanted to do a vaginal exam. And they're like, well, why? And she's like, well, because I need to know if we need to call the doctor. And she's like, oh, you should probably call the doctor. But Nursey doesn't call the doctor because Nursey doesn't believe that Jenny is actually pushing. And so then she's like, oh, I want to draw your blood. And Jenny's like, no, I'm giving birth to a baby. Like, you're not drawing blood. And the reason the nurse actually wanted to draw the blood was because she wanted to know Jenny's blood type in case Jenny needed a C-section. Like, how stupid is that? Like, she was literally birthing her baby, and the nurse was going through her little tick boxes and being like, oh, I need to draw blood in case she needs a C-section. But a physiological birth is literally happening in front of her. She did not have any appreciation for this at all. It was very frustrating. But because Jenny had been working with me for 2 years, pretty much, and we had Michelle, she was Jenny's doula, and she ended up catching the placenta after it came out because the nurse wouldn't touch it. The nurse wouldn't do anything. Like, the nurse was like, why is she even here, basically? But this is how the system is. So you got to get out of your fear so that you can recognize that the system is not going to save you. Okay, the medical system, the birth system, maternity care, your doula, childbirth classes, none of that is going to save you. You have to save yourself. The next thing you need to know is you need to know what you want in your birth. Okay, you need to figure out, after you've gone through that fear, what exactly the kind of birth that you're looking for. If you're looking for a natural birth, then you are not going to want to go and dive into what to expect when you're expecting. Now, everybody else expects you to go and get that book. Everybody else expects you to go and hire an OB. They expect you to follow the regular routine. But if you're planning a natural birth, you can't do that because that whole system is set up to create a medicalized model of birth, which you don't want. So you got to go in knowing what you want. If you're wanting a VBAC, you don't just go into a regular natural birth group. You need to go into a VBAC specific group and one that understands physiological birth, not the heavily medically managed VBAC group, because those ones you can get set up to fail again. If you know you don't want to be induced, then you are not going to want to have things that are talking about induction all the time. You're not going to want to follow that route. So there are so many paths to childbirth, but they all go in different directions. And so when you're taking your books and your classes and hiring your care provider and choosing your environment, you need to be intentional with it. You really need to understand that you need to know what you want. If you don't know what you want when you come to your birth, it's not going to help you. And I do have a book. It's called the Your Empowered Birth Plan Roadmap, and you can get it off of my site. Go to www.empoweringmomsbirth.com/store, and it's just down there. It's a quick read. It's worth every penny, and it will really help you to get the empowered birth plan that you really want, so then you can take those next steps and start planning your birth. So Jenny did this too. She used the roadmap, and Rebecca used the roadmap, and Lisa used the roadmap. I used the roadmap myself before I called it a roadmap. I knew exactly what I wanted in my birth. Jenny did too. She had like pages and pages of what she wanted. She had contingency plans. She knew the kind of care provider that she wanted. She knew like the kind of experience that she wanted, so that when she got pregnant, she was just like, I know exactly where I need to go look for stuff. So you need to know what you want. Next thing you need to know is where to find these people, okay? So you need to know where to find a care provider that's going to serve you. You need to be targeted with it. You can't just go into it and be like, okay, I need to find a childbirth class. What do you guys recommend? No. I need to find a care provider. Who do you recommend? No, you can't do any of that. You can't go, oh, who's the best doula in the area? You need to find someone who is going to actually help you get the birth you want. So you need to be asking yourself, where can I find the education? What education do I need to get the birth that I actually am wanting here? And Jenny did this too. She's like, I don't want to have high blood pressure be an issue in my pregnancy. So I need to get some extra information that's going to help me manage that. And the same thing when she discovered that she might have gestational diabetes. She also was like, well, where can I find some information? And she did end up getting a course that would help her with her diet, because the nurse at the clinic for the gestational diabetes clinic was like, well, we get about a 50-50 chance of you getting on insulin. And she was determined not to be in that 50% that was on insulin. So she did that. So you have to recognize what are the challenges that you might personally face, and what are the things that you need to learn in order to get the birth you want. And you need to look outside of the typical childbirth books. You need to look outside of typical childbirth education. You need to be really targeted with it. Maybe there's mindset work that you need to do. Maybe there's trauma work that you need to do. Whatever it is, you need to recognize what you need. You need to recognize where to get that education. And the next one, as I said, I touched on this a little bit, is you need to know who to hire. You need to know, okay, I need a specific kind of doula who offers specific kinds of services. You need to know what services you want for your doula, what services you want for a care provider, what services you want in a childbirth class. Because if you're not specific, you're just going to be throwing spaghetti at the wall. You're just going to be like, oh, I think I'm going to take this little dart and I'm just going to throw it on the map, and wherever it lands, that's where I go. No, don't do that. Because if you go and do that, you're going to be taking a route that's going to lead you to McDonald's. If you're wondering a little bit about that reference, basically, I talk about this inside of my book, again, Your Empowered Birth. It's in the first few chapters. So again, you can go to www.empoweringmomsbirth.com/chapters. But the thing is with this is that if you are craving a really nice, juicy steak, and I'm using steak because I haven't had it in a while and I'm really hungry, but you're really craving that, you don't want to go to McDonald's. But what if, as you're looking for this restaurant that has this juicy steak, you come across someone who says, oh, I know how to get there, and you let them drive. And as they're driving, you find out they're pulling into McDonald's, and you're like, wait, what? I said steak. They're like, oh, well, you know, we can't really get to that restaurant right now. It's too hard. And like you said, you're hungry. So like, this is basically the same thing. You can get yourself a hamburger. I mean, it's beef. Well, you didn't ask for that. You asked for a freaking 5-star steak at a steakhouse, and they've taken you to McDonald's. Well, this is maternity care. Okay. You say you want a natural birth, and then you go and hire a care provider who says, oh yeah, we do natural birth. And then what happens is that you're being told, oh, well, you know, you're not showing signs of labor progress yet, so we're going to try to get things going with a membrane sweep. That's not proper natural birth. It doesn't facilitate natural birth. It messes with the process. Oh, you know, you're getting close to 40 weeks and you still haven't gone into labor, so we'll schedule your induction for next week. Well, now you're scrambling to try to get into labor before this induction because you want a natural birth and you don't want this unnatural induction, but it's already happened. And it happened not when they told you that they were going to induce you. It happened when you hired them, because they always had that plan for you. You just didn't see it at the beginning. You didn't see that the person that you were hiring was actually going to take you to McDonald's. So you need to have that person who is going to actually give you what you want. And that takes a lot of skill. It takes asking the right questions. And again, Your Empowered Birth will help you. So you're going to be able to do that. You'll be able to find the right care provider for you, so you won't fall into those traps. And the next thing, you got to have the right support. If you do not have people in your life who are your cheerleaders, who are supporting you and showing you where to get the facilitators and where to get the information, it's not going to work. So if you go and talk to your mom and you say, hey, mom, I want to have a really good birth. And your mom goes and says, oh, yeah, use this doctor. They were really good for mine. And then you find out that your mom had an episiotomy. That's not a good doctor. That's not the one you want. Or you go to talk to your best friend. They're like, oh, yeah, this doctor was really great. And they were really helpful. But then you find out, it's like, well, wait a minute, but my friend had a C-section. They're not going to help you. Or maybe they had a completely different idea of what natural birth is, and they thought that that is what natural birth is. They say, oh yeah, I had a natural birth. But then you find out that they really just had an unmedicated birth, but they had multiple vaginal exams. They had an IV. They might have even had Pitocin during that birth. And they might have been able to do it unmedicated, but it was not the physiological birth that you're envisioning. And the same thing with home birth. Sometimes you think, oh, I want a home birth, and they had a home birth, so it should be okay. But maybe that home birth was also heavily managed, and maybe it's not exactly the way that you want things to be. So you need to have the right support around you, people who have actually done it and done it the way that you have, or know people who have done it, or can help you get the information that you need, who's actually going to be supportive. Because if you go into a regular mom group and you say, hey, I want to try for a VBAC, and you're in a community where VBAC is just like discouraged, which is what also happened to Jenny, because in our community, if you want to go for a VBAC, it is incredibly difficult to do. Okay, it is incredibly difficult. And the mom groups will then say things like, oh, you know, my C-section the second time around wasn't as bad as the first. Well, that's not what you asked for. You asked how to have a VBAC. But now they're telling you, well, the C-section isn't that bad the next time. And they do it for convenience. They say it's so much more convenient to schedule your birth. It's an easier recovery than the last time. But again, that's not what you asked for. You're not asking for McDonald's. You're asking for your 5-star steak. So you want your 5-star steak? I'm going to show you how to get your 5-star steak. And I know for like without a shadow of a doubt that the empowered birth system will help you. So at any level that you need it, it's there for you. It's there for you in the form of the live classes that we do every time that I run in this Facebook group. It's in the live free trainings. It's in the digital courses now. It's in the books. And it's also in my high-level coaching program. So at whatever level that you're at, I wanted this to be accessible to you because I know what it's like. I know what it's like to not know where to get information and to get your birth plan derailed and be like, how the hell did this happen? Like, I had a plan and it's gone to hell. Like, is it because birth doesn't work? Is it because my body is actually broken? Is it like, did I have too high of expectations? No, it's not because your expectations were too high. It's not because your body was broken. You did nothing wrong. You did nothing wrong except follow what you were taught to do. And you were taught to trust that somebody else would handle everything. You were taught that if you got into the car with somebody else, that they would take you to get that 5-star steak. And then you wound up at McDonald's. That's it. That's all you did. That's all you did wrong. And you can now pivot and do it better this time. Or if you are already on that path as a first-time mom, you can get off. You can get out of the car and you can say, that's it. I'm going to go and get the GPS and I'm going to go and I'm going to get an empowered birth. And I do encourage you to go check out the first 3 chapters of my book, though, because it's going to help you and you'll understand more about the birth processes and why our births don't work anymore and what you can do about it. Because I'm done. I'm done watching moms be traumatized and being like, if only I'd had something. Well, now I have something. I have something amazing, something that's powerful, something that works. And it works better than I ever thought possible. And it's going to work for you. And I'm just so excited. And if you are also following me on Instagram, I'm going to be sharing bits and pieces of my book. You'll get to get those snippets as well. All right. So thank you so much for watching. I love you. If you do have questions, I will go back and read in the chat. Start inviting moms to this group. Start telling them about what's in here. Start telling them, it's like, look, like get out of these ridiculous mom groups that are just going to give you the same wrong information. Start dropping the Empowered Birth community link. Drop the link to the website, empoweringmomsbirth.com. I made it so simple that you can just drop this information everywhere that you need to. Start sharing the YouTube videos. Let's get this out there because you know what it's like. You know what it's like to try to get the birth that you want and have everybody around you telling you you can't do it. You know what it's like to have tried and failed to get the birth you want because you didn't have the right information. And then you go, well, wait a minute, if I'd only known this piece, I never would have made that choice and I would have had the empowered birth that I want. I'm so mad right now. Good. Use that. Take your anger, get good and mad, and get this information out there because it's not being taught. It's not being taught. And your care provider doesn't, like, if they are a narcissistic care provider, they don't want you to know it. And that's how we get those people fired. Okay? Because if they can't get clients, they are out of a job. And then that means that more empowered birth workers can come in, the good ones, the ones that are actually going to serve you, and we can help everybody together. Okay? So this is my gift to you, empowered moms. Thank you so much for all of your support. I really, really appreciate you. Success does not come at just one person. Like, it takes all of us. And the more that you support me, the more I can support you, the more I can get that information. We can connect our networks together. We can get the right education out there, and we can do so much for ourselves and for each other and for our children and our grandchildren. Like, this is really a legacy that I'm building here for you. And I wouldn't be here without you. So I love you. I appreciate you. And I'll see you next week. Bye.